Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining me today for episode 689 of the People Behind the Science podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and I'm joined today by Dr. Alex DiFeliceantonio to talk more about life and science. So I hope you enjoy getting a behind-the-scenes look into the life and experiences of another researcher in today's episode. But if you want to meet even more of today's scientists, listeners, you can check out our website at peoplebehindthescience.com or subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast platform. And today, Alex is going to share some of her insights and stories after this short sponsor message.
Over 3 decades, Lampire Biological Laboratories has been a trusted partner for your drug discovery needs. We offer a variety of services, standard protocols, and full customizations. For your free consultation, please call 215-795-2838 or email lampire@lampire.com.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to People Behind the Science. Today, I am excited to speak with our guest scientist, Dr. Alex DiFeliceantonio. So, Alex, welcome to our show today. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we are thrilled to learn from you in our conversation today. And I'd love to start by telling our listeners just a little bit about your background and how you got to your current position. So listeners, Alex is an assistant professor at the Fralin Biomedical Research Institute at the Virginia Tech Carilion School, as well as associate director of the Center for Health Behaviors Research there. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology from Sweet Briar College and her PhD in biopsychology from the University of Michigan. Next, Alex worked as a visiting postdoctoral fellow in the Translational Neurocircuitry Group at the Max Planck Institute for Metabolism Research in Cologne, Germany. She also conducted postdoctoral research in the Department of Neuroscience at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and she served as an associate research scientist in the Department of Psychiatry at Yale University before accepting her current position. And in our interview today, Alex, we're excited to get to know you as a scientist, of course, but also as a person. So can you start by telling us what you like to do when you're not doing science?
So I have an almost 3-year-old. So a lot of my time when I'm not working is spent hanging out with him. We really love going to parks. He's super into the garbage man. So a lot of times we follow the garbage trucks down the street in our neighborhood. It's always really fun going to the farmer's market with a cute little 3-year-old because people will just give you free stuff. They just hand him things.
Aw, that's amazing.
And then, other than hanging out with my son, I really love to read a lot. I have read every Hugo and Nebula Award winner. Those are the awards that are given to science fiction and fantasy novels since the award's inception in the 70s. So I spend a lot of time in the evening reading for pleasure.
That is amazing. I'm an avid reader myself, and we love talking books on this show. So do you have a favorite book that you would recommend for me and our listeners, whether it's related to science or completely separate?
Probably my favorite science fiction author is Ursula K. Le Guin, and my favorite novel by her is The Dispossessed. Not super long, and it's a standalone novel, so you're not like committing to 1,000 pages of a series or something.
Excellent. So what do you like about the book?
So I think people dislike science fiction because it seems very either like technique driven or, we're going to talk about like warp speed or aliens or blasters or something. And Le Guin is really known for writing really kind of character-driven science fiction and really using science fiction in a way that I think what a lot of people actually enjoy about it, which is to take something that you kind of see in our society or see in our current culture and kind of bring it out to an extreme end to explore it in a way. And The Dispossessed is really just kind of especially character-driven. Actually, it's about the arc of a scientist's life, and he makes a discovery. And that discovery really changes his life and it changes the life of his family and it kind of changes society in a way that he really didn't anticipate at all. And it's about him like trying to navigate that. So it's a really interesting story. And then I guess it's a story that I kind of find a lot of relation to because it's about a scientist and about just kind of what happens to him over the course of his work.
This sounds wonderful. Alex, you've got my attention. I am excited to put this on our website for our listeners to find as well. Ursula Le Guin, Dispossessed.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll definitely add that to our reading list. And we talked a little bit about your life and your hobbies outside of science, but I love to talk about your scientific side as well. So Alex, how do you describe your work to people who might not be familiar to your specific field or might not be in science at all?
What I like to say about what I study is I just try to answer the question, why do we eat what we eat? Why do we make these food choices? And really, I kind of frame this, why on earth is this important? Why should we be caring about what people eat? Is that we know a conservative estimate is that over 300,000 preventable deaths a year are attributable to diet. And all of us eat, right? At least 3 times a day, generally. That makes diet and diet choice a really important health behavior. And it's a point that we can intervene and probably have a really large impact on people's lives and on their health. That's why I really care about why people eat what they eat and understanding what are the mechanisms. And I approach it from a bit of a kind of neuroscience and physiology standpoint. How does the brain interact with the body? How does the body in turn interact with the brain, which is then going to change what we put in our mouths, what we eat, which is going to impact our physiology and our body, which then changes our brain and then our body, and figuring out where are we able to kind of tune things in that cycle.
Absolutely. And I think these gut-brain connections are getting increased attention the more and more we learn about them. So I think this is a particularly fascinating area of study.
I find it interesting, of course, that's why I'm here. But we have been learning more and more. I think a lot of times neuroscientists in particular are kind of guilty of just like treating us as floating heads, treating people and animals as just kind of neck up. And I think that the field in general, and especially myself, have really been thinking, okay, we are bodies and we are bodies that interact with brains. And what does that mean? And what can we learn from that communication?
Well, you can definitely tell that you are excited and enthusiastic about the work that you do, but I know there can be tough times in science. It can be helpful to have quotes, sayings, things to keep you motivated when you're facing some of the big challenges. So do you have a favorite quote or a saying that really motivates or inspires you, Alex?
I don't know if I have a particular quote. I mean, I think one of the things that my postdoc mentor would always talk about that I like particularly are that studies where you find an outcome that you weren't expecting are actually the most interesting. And those are the ones that drive the field forward the most. And so when you're working on something and it seems just like everything is going wrong and nothing is turning out how you expect, I like to remind myself, okay, this means that we fundamentally misunderstood something. We made an assumption that we shouldn't have made. And in reality is very different from whatever our scientific framework was. So that's a big opportunity to learn. And that's a big opportunity for growth. So I like to try and reframe it that way instead of just it being like failure after failure after failure. And it's true, the times when I have repeatedly failed. At one point in graduate school, I had run the same experiment 6 times and not come out with the outcome that we expected. Are times where you just learn the most. You learn the most about like yourself and your techniques, and you also learn the most about the science and the hypotheses and what's really driving these questions.
I have to ask, when you were going through this experience, having to repeat this experiment over and over, what kept you going? What maybe kept you from just sort of putting it on the shelf and moving on to something else?
Maybe some sort of pathological stubbornness. I think a lot of people who are in science are a bit stubborn because a lot of times what we do doesn't work because we don't know enough. So yeah, I wanted to figure out the answer, and it really bothered me that I couldn't design the right experiment for it to make sense to me. So I did run it 6 times, and this was working with an animal model. And so we had to train the animals for about 20 days before I could even run the test. And then there was a single day of testing. And then if it went wrong, basically on that day, I knew whether it worked or not.
Oh, no.
So there were a lot of very frustrating single days. But I just really wanted to know, like, what was I kind of fundamentally misunderstanding about this paradigm that was leading to this result? And it was really great when I finally figured it out. So there's that.
Oh, absolutely. I think encountering the unexpected and really kind of working through and solving these puzzles is part of the excitement of science. And I'm curious to hear about how your scientific journey began. Alex, can you take us all the way back to the beginning and tell us a little bit more about what first sparked your interest in science?
So when you mentioned, introduced me that I was a psychology major, I was actually also a Spanish double major because I entered college planning to major in creative writing and English.
Oh, wow.
And now I'm a neuroscientist. And yeah, I think I had the experience that a lot of young girls do, that I wasn't really encouraged in science and math ever. I wasn't particularly great at math. It didn't come very easy to me. But language, reading, I've always loved to read, writing, all of these things came very easily. And so I was kind of pushed in that direction. So I started college at 16. I was young. Nobody actually knows what they want to do at 16. You think you do, but you don't.
Right.
And I really wanted to be a writer. And as I was kind of doing that coursework, I started to realize that what I really liked most about reading and about literature was kind of thinking about, okay, what are the people in these stories thinking? Why are they behaving the way they are? And why is the author kind of interpreting the world in this way and trying to tell us something through the behavior of people? And so I just got really wrapped up in understanding behavior. And then I took a psychology course. I hadn't been able to take psychology in high school. My school didn't offer it. And then it finally clicked. I was like, oh, this is how you study behavior. This is how you study people. This is what psychology is. So I started studying psychology. I went to a very small college, but I was lucky enough that we had professors there who were doing research with some animal models. And so I got involved in a lab. I was able to actually kind of run my own experiments in that lab. And then I got the opportunity to do kind of a research intensive summer program. These are great programs. If there's anyone who's listening, younger and wants to get involved in science, they're called Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowships. Many universities offer them. They often pay you, so you get to go and spend a summer working in a lab and really see what it's like. And after that, I decided I want to go to grad school, and I just wanted to spend my life doing science.
Oh, that is amazing. And I will say myself, I had wonderful experiences in these undergraduate research fellowships. So definitely a phenomenal opportunity. But what attracted you to this particular area of research that you're in now?
At the University of Michigan, I was in Kent Berridge's lab. And Kent Berridge is very well known for a theory of drug addiction called incentive salience. And a lot of my peers in similar labs were very interested in drug addiction. So we were interested in these areas of the brain that drove what we generally think of and we call intense or aberrant motivation. So these really intense cravings for drugs, kind of intense behavior for drugs. But a lot of what we did, we use food as a model. So we would use sugar pellets for the animals, or in my case, I used M&Ms. So I just got really interested in understanding, okay, we acknowledge that people have these intense cravings and motivations for drugs, but people have intense motivations and cravings for foods too. And the circuit that addictive drugs act on is the circuit that evolved to get us towards adaptive things, right? Towards food, towards mates, movement. It's the same area of the brain. So I just really wanted to understand a bit more, okay, how do these circuits and these brain areas, how do they work under natural circumstances? So for food reward. And then when I was thinking about that, like I said, I was kind of always the student in the corner giving the rats M&Ms. So I was looking, it's like, what about an M&M is natural? So are these, when we're thinking about kind of intense sweetness and intense fattiness, are we actually kind of, what circuits are we tapping into and how might that be different for different types of food? So that's what really got me on this path, I guess, is feeding rats M&Ms.
I love it. And you had some really cool postdoctoral experiences as well. So can you talk about that transition for you, going from finishing up your PhD there at the University of Michigan to where you went next?
Yeah, so I was finishing up my PhD. I was getting absurdly allergic to the rats.
Oh, no.
This happens actually a lot to people who work with animals as you start to develop allergies. And mine were getting really, really bad. And at the same time, I was having some trouble connecting the work that I was doing in animals with people, basically, and understanding how is what I'm doing going to have a direct observable outcome in people. And animal work is hugely important. So much of what we know about neural circuits comes from animal models. But I was just having a lot of trouble with that transition, and I was super allergic to the rodents. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to switch fields, and I want to go work in human neuroimaging. So I want to study people, and I want to look at people's brains. So I reached out to Dana Small at Yale, because if you want to do neuroimaging of food reward, she's really the person to go to. Not nearly as many people do it as well as she does. So she talked to me and said basically, okay, well, I have an opportunity I'm starting a collaboration with the Max Planck Institute in Cologne, Germany. You can come here and you can train, so you can learn our techniques here. And then we're going to send you over to Germany to set up a project. And I was like, when I was coming out of grad school, I was like, yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
I'll go set up a technique that I don't actually know in a foreign country. But that's basically what I did. So I trained with Dana. I ran some projects at Yale while I was there. And then I took those techniques and we started projects in Germany and then kind of went back and forth. I got married in the middle there. So I was going back and forth between Germany and New Haven. And then my husband was in Boston. And it was a great experience. Honestly, I didn't 100% realize what I was getting myself into, but it seemed like a good time. And then it was really helpful actually in setting up my own lab, because when I came to Virginia Tech and basically needed all the equipment, needed to set everything up, I'm like, oh, well, I did this once in a language that I don't speak particularly well. So doing it in English is kind of a breeze.
I love that. And it sounds like you really took advantage of this opportunity that came by. And I think that's something that not a lot of young scientists or early career scientists have this confidence to just, like you said, jump into this new position where you're starting new techniques that you're just learning now in this foreign country. So I think it's amazing that you're able to have that opportunity and to not be afraid to take it and to jump into this uncharted waters for yourself.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that is fearlessness or stupidity.
But it worked out well, so it's totally fine.
It worked out well, and it was a great experience. And yeah, I had lived abroad before. Like I said, I was a Spanish major, so I had lived a year in the south of Spain. So I lived other places and just kind of liked the idea of doing a postdoc in another country, because generally in science, postdocs are temporary positions. And so it's a good time to try out a new place to live or just something different, because generally it's not going to be permanent. So it was really fun.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. And you've had a very interesting journey to get to your current position. And now you're working on some fascinating research projects in the lab. I'd love to dive into a little bit more detail if we can. Alex, do you have a favorite project, or maybe just a project that you're very excited about at the moment that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so we have a couple exciting projects that are going on in the lab. Actually, my graduate student, our lights are broken, and she just walked by the door. The lights won't turn on. So I'll describe her project because it's cool. So 58% of the calories that we eat in the US come from ultra-processed foods. So foods that are industrially produced and contain additives and flavorants that just don't occur in normal culinary use. And actually, we don't know that much about these foods, especially considering how widely consumed they are. So the kind of gold standard in science to understand how a particular something is affecting health is what's called a randomized control trial, where you take people and you randomly put them into one group that gets nothing, or in the case of a medication, standard of care, and then you put people in another group and they receive your new medication and you look for outcomes. There's only been one randomized control trial on ultra-processed food intake, and it was published in 2019.
Oh, wow.
So we just started studying what is the effect of ultra-processed foods on our physiology. And the outcomes from that study were pretty striking. The study was done by Kevin Hall at the NIH. It was inpatient, so they could control absolutely everything people were eating. They gave people a diet that contained 80% ultra-processed foods, and then switched them over after 2 weeks to a diet that contained 0% ultra-processed foods. And what they found is that people rapidly gained weight on the ultra-processed diet. They also consumed more, and they consumed these foods a lot quicker. So we wanted, given that that's the only trial, right? Generally, when we know things in science, we know them from multiple avenues of evidence, multiple studies, multiple ways of asking the same question, because then that really gives us confidence that, okay, this thing is probably true. So what we wanted to do was to repeat that study and extend it in a couple ways. One way that we're extending it is we're giving people what's called eucaloric diets. And all that means is that we're going to measure their energy expenditure before they come into us. And we're going to give them the exact number of calories they need to maintain their weight. And so in Kevin Hall's study, he found this really dramatic, he saw some metabolic changes, but he saw this really dramatic change in weight. And so we don't really know if the food itself is driving some of these metabolic changes, or if it was actually the weight gain and the increased consumption. So we're going to try and control for that by giving people the exact amount of calories they need. And the only difference is those calories come from ultra-processed foods or they come from minimally processed foods. The other things that we are adding is that study didn't tell us really anything about the brain. And we know actually from a lot of animal work that consuming these types of foods changes neural circuits. but we don't really have any evidence for that at all in humans. So we are going to put people into an fMRI scanner, so functional magnetic resonance imaging, which is kind of our current best way to look at the human brain. And we're going to do that before and after each diet intervention. So we're going to give them an ultra-processed milkshake in the scanner. We can look at their brain response to that milkshake. We'll put them on an ultra-processed diet, give them that ultra-processed milkshake again, and see how that changed. And then there's a washout period, scan, minimally processed diet, scan again. And then the final way that we're extending this is we are, instead of recruiting adults, we are recruiting from an age group that's called late adolescence or emerging adulthood, which is 18 to 25. And part of the reason for that is that we know a lot of the circuits that are involved and that are changed by these foods from animal models are circuits that are still developing in 18 to 25-year-olds. So those that control executive function and things like that. So we'll be measuring executive function as well as recruiting from this age group to understand maybe is there something kind of especially vulnerable about this age group to some of these diet-induced changes. And also thinking about 18 to 25-year-olds, this is the time period where most people are going to college. They're making a lot of their food decisions on their own for the first time. And actually, the rate of ultra-processed food consumption is higher in this age group. Probably, again, that kind of effect of going to college, relying on a lot of convenience foods. A lot of, if you don't have a meal plan and you're in a dorm or heating stuff up on your hot plate that you're not supposed to have. And so we wanted to really understand what is going on in this adolescent population. So that's one of the exciting studies that we have going. We are still in the ramp up phase of that, and we're getting ready to start recruiting.
Absolutely. And I think the scenario that you painted here, the college diet, this is a time where, like you said, your neural circuits are still developing, but you're also sort of in this intense cognitive environment where you're taking courses, you're taking exams, and you also, in general, at least in my case specifically, have a terrible diet at that point in your life. So
it is true. Yeah. And then it'll be really interesting for the ones we put on the minimally processed diet. So that's 0% ultra processed food. So a lot of whole foods. And we actually had a little trouble framing because we wrote a grant for this, of whether we should frame it as, is there something detrimental about going on the ultra-processed diet, or is there something actually beneficial going on the minimally processed diet? Because this age group is consuming about 60-65% of their calories from ultra-processed foods. And so the bump up to 80 isn't that high, but the drop from 60 to 0% is a lot. So it'll be really interesting when we get those data to kind of think about which one of those arms is actually the control group and think about the differences that we observe and how to interpret those.
Well, this is a fascinating study. Listeners will have to keep an eye out for the findings once the study is completed. And we talked about some of the challenges that you encounter in research and this one experiment that you, like you said, had to repeat 6 times. I think these challenges are so common in science that they often overshadow the successes because they're so few and far between in some cases. But we love to celebrate all successes, big and small, in science. So, Alex, do you have a favorite success story you'd like to share with us today?
I had mentioned that it's really great to find something that you don't expect. But more recently, when you find something that you actually did hypothesize, but you weren't sure you were actually going to find it. So we had this study where I'm really interested in the gut-brain axis. So we know that carbohydrate, so one of the major macronutrient sources of calories in the gut, it increases dopamine in this chunk of brain called the striatum. And that signal is really important for learning, and it's really important for motivation. And we know fat does the same thing. So fat and carbohydrate, both through independent peripheral pathways, so different pathways through the body to the brain, converge on the singular signal. And we were thinking, okay, you don't actually see fat and carbohydrate in combination very often in nature. There are very few natural foods that combine those two. But if we think about the foods that are in our modern food environment that we really crave, we find really delicious, or we will kind of go out of our way for, these are pizza, donuts, things that definitely have fat and carbohydrates. So our hypothesis was there's something about this signal that is combining in kind of a supra additive way to kind of trick us towards overvaluing these foods. And so we designed a task. It's a behavioral economics task where basically, or I shouldn't say we designed a food version of it, but this is a well-established behavioral economics task where you have people bid on different foods. So you show them the food and you say, okay, how much would you pay for this? And then you tell them that the computer is bidding against them. And at the end of the session, if they bid more than the computer on a trial, they get to stay and they get to eat that food. But the money comes out of their remuneration at the end. So you can't just bid the max amount on every single food unless you actually are willing to pay the max amount. And so our hypothesis was, okay, so we created a picture set that was foods that mainly contain calories from fat and foods that mainly contain calories from carbohydrates and foods that were combinations. But we showed all the foods had the same number of calories shown. So the portion that people were bidding on was the same. Energy density was really similar, kind of everything else that we could think we could control for. And our idea was that if the combination foods are overvalued, people will be willing to pay more for them, calorie for calorie. And I still remember we collected the data, had this idea. I ran the statistical analysis to see if it was true, and it came out with a significant value. And I remember looking at it really hard and being like, really? This happened exactly like we thought it would? Because that happens it happens very rarely that like you're right. So I remember I looked at it and then I went down the hall and there was another postdoc down the hall who his background was in mathematics and in robotics. And so he was just a much better mathematician and statistician than me. And I said, okay, so I ran this way and I got this result and I'm surprised. It's significant. And he was like, well, yeah, it looks like you did it right. And I was like, okay, well, what would be the more like rigorous test? What's the better test? And he was like, okay, well, you can do it this way or you can do it this way. And if both of those would probably mean that it's really true. And I was like, all right, okay. So I went back with my code. I coded it out. And I ran it, and both of them were significant. I went back down the hall, and I was like, Lionel, tell me, do you think this is real? And he was like, yeah, I think so. And I was like, all right. Somehow we actually found this thing that we thought we were going to find. And I was initially a little skeptical.
Oh, absolutely. I think getting that confirmation is such an amazing feeling where you find this thing, you're like, is it real? Is it true? Did I make a mistake? And then you get that confirmation, the couple of different tests, like you said, that you ran that just sort of solidifies that, okay, this is happening.
Yeah. And so I was really excited about that. We actually found some differences in the brain. And so that has been kind of a jumping off point for some other work, but it was really, okay, when I ran that first test and made that first graph, I was like, I can't believe this is true.
So how did you celebrate this exciting result, this exciting finding that surprised you in how much it matched what you were expecting to happen?
I feel like maybe I ran up and down the hall a couple times. I did that a lot. And we were in temporary labs. We were in shipping containers. They had these narrow hallways and then the offices. So it was like inside of a shipping container. So when you ran down the hall, it made a lot of noise. And so I would run down the hallways and people would like stick their heads out and be like, what is happening?
A celebration. That's all you need to know.
I'm pretty sure I probably ran down the hallway a couple times and then tried to get in touch with Dana, who was the PI on that project. And I think it was because we had a time difference because I was in Germany. I think it was like nighttime and I emailed her like 4 times. Then she got back to me the next day.
Well, this is an amazing success. I think one of these moments in science that you'll never forget, because as you said, so often things turn out not the way that you would expect them to. And we touched on some different aspects of your career, particularly some of these opportunities you've had to travel to go to different places for your training. But I'd love to talk a bit more about scientific travel. I think this is a perk of the job that a lot of people may not realize is part of it. So do you have a favorite place that your science has taken you, Alex?
Going to Cologne was a great experience. I mean, one, living abroad and just experiencing things in a different city, just how different cultures approach things is really useful. And just also a great experience to just kind of grow as a person. I also just learned a lot there because the people that I was around were just very different people than I was used to. I was used to generally being around a lot of neuroscientists. And like I said, the postdoc down the hall from me worked on artificial intelligence and was a mathematician. Those opportunities more than anything are useful when you get a bunch of different types of scientists together. I should say the kind of most fun that you generally have traveling in science is conference travel. So we generally hold conferences in different places. My kind of favorite conference, one I consider my home society, is the Society for the Study of Ingestive Behavior. And that society is made up of about 2/3 people from North America and about 1/3 people from Europe. And so they do 2 meetings in North America, and then they'll do a meeting in Europe. And they've held the last couple in Europe in Porto, Portugal, which has just been really fun. It's such a beautiful city that I had never visited. And then to have the opportunity to go there, and I mean, we're ingestive behavior people, right? So we love food. We love to go out and eat and talk about eating while eating. And so getting to do that in a really beautiful place. And then I really enjoy that meeting because it's a very, it's just a bunch of people who all study the same thing, but from a bunch of different angles. And so there are people who study mainly behavior. There's people who study mainly the brain. There's people who mainly study physiology, but they all are interested in eating. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. And generally, SSIB goes to good places.
It sounds wonderful. And I love this mention that you have of just these interdisciplinary environments that you've worked in, or groups of people that you get to interact with regularly, because I think that's what really makes science exciting as well, is sort of getting all of these different perspectives together who have a similar interest, but are maybe approaching it from different fields and different backgrounds. And it sounds amazing, this city in Portugal. So can you tell us a little bit more about what were some of the favorite things that you did or maybe ate while you were there?
I have actually a couple funny things that we ate in Porto. So I have a good friend, Shua, who was a postdoc in my postdoc lab. She was actually a grad student while I was there. And we are both just kind of adventurous travelers. Like, I just like to leave the apartment in the morning, whatever city you're in, and just go like wander around and find stuff. We were just wandering down the street and there was a pop-up restaurant that was opening. So we just walked in. We were hungry. It was dinner time. And they were like, oh, this is our first night. We don't really have a menu. You're welcome to come in. It was basically like, it was only the friends of the chef that were there and us, two foreigners. And so we sit down and they hand us the menu, and neither of us speak Portuguese and I speak Spanish. And so I kind of understood, but food words really vary. Even like in Spanish, country by country, food words are very different. And so they ran the menu through Google Translate and handed it to us. And the translations were just bonkers. So I looked at Shua and I was like, we need to order the two weirdest things on this menu.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ordered the woodpecker gratin and the empty steak.
Both sound delicious.
I know. And actually they were both delicious. I have actually to this day no idea what was in the woodpecker gratin. I really hope it wasn't an actual woodpecker. But I still remember Shua, the empty steak, they brought it to the table and it was a steak. And Shua looked at me and she goes, do you think we should send it back because it's not empty enough?
This looks like it will be full, yeah.
Yes, this is in fact a full steak.
Oh, that is amazing. Yeah, I've had the same experience when you travel abroad and you try to use Google Translate on menus, and it really doesn't work as well as it does in sort of museums and other applications.
No, it does not work for food.
Well, this sounds amazing. And you spent quite a bit of time in Cologne. Do you have particular memories or maybe favorite places that you saw in Cologne while you were there?
Cologne is a really interesting city. I think a lot of Germans, they call it ugly, mainly because none of the pre-war architecture exists, because the city was 90% destroyed, both population and land area. It was just bombed. And so pretty much everything that was rebuilt in this really utilitarian kind of industrial style. So all of this really beautiful old buildings and cobblestone streets, there's a little bit of that, but it doesn't really exist as much as it does in other cities in Germany. But what's really, or at least what I really loved about Cologne, is when they rebuilt it, they really intentionally built a lot of green space. So Cologne is along the river, and they built kind of these semicircles of parks that radiate out. So you can actually bike to almost anywhere in the city 100% in a park. So you can take the paths, will connect kind of both sides of the city all through green spaces. And it was just something that is also kind of very different, as an American coming from a very kind of car-dominated culture, to be able to kind of be in a city on your bike and you kind of hop up onto a different track, and then all of a sudden you're in the middle of a park and you can take that whole route to wherever you want to go. And I really loved that. I feel like maybe I loved the things that the Germans complained about the most. And I also just loved the trains. The transportation system was great. It would always crack me up because I had lived in Spain and I rode the train like the Metro North and Amtrak in the US quite a lot. And my German colleagues would always complain about the German trains and how the Swiss trains were better or something. I'd be like, I need to take y'all on a train ride in the Northeast corridor of the US and you will never complain again.
I 100% agree. I think the public transit in Europe, it's so much more smooth and there's just so many more opportunities for different places that they can take you compared to the US.
Yeah. Having all the parks was great. And another thing I think people don't realize about Cologne is it actually has the largest Turkish population outside of Turkey. It is the largest mosque in Europe, is in Cologne, actually in the top of the street where I lived. And so it was really kind of fun from like a food environment standpoint. I lived in the Turkish neighborhood to kind of go outside and be surrounded by like Turkish bakeries and kebab shops and stuff. And a lot of, my colleagues or friends were from Turkey, would say the best Turkish kebab isn't in Turkey anymore. It's in Cologne.
Well, it sounds like you had an amazing experience in Cologne, and some of these wonderful conferences you've been able to go to as well, I think are highlights in the memories of scientists when they look back on their career. So I think this is a wonderful aspect of being a scientist. And I think oftentimes people have this picture in their mind of what life is like as a scientist or what scientists themselves are like. And oftentimes it's this sort of sterile environment, a person in a white coat in the lab. And I think that's not how it is in so many of the cases. I think scientists are these creative, amazing, funny people who like to get together and have fun together. So do you have a story of your own, Alex, of maybe this human side of science or quirky traditions or just funny or fun memories you shared with colleagues that may go against some of the stereotypes people have?
What struck me when you were saying that is this idea of scientists kind of being in a white coat, not being fun. And I have a lot of goofy sweaters.
Ooh, I'm interested.
And I don't dress particularly professionally, I would say. I was standing there in like my jeans and I have a kind of oversized cardigan with cats all over it. And my lab manager was talking to when we recruit undergrads into the lab, they come work with us, they get research experience. And my lab manager was emailing with an undergrad. And the undergrad was asking about the dress code in the lab. Did we have a particular business dress code or what it needed to be? She looked at me, she's like, can I just send them your picture of what you're wearing?
The cat sweaters are required.
Yeah, I know. We're not a particularly formal group.
But I think that makes it more fun. People can express their individual style a little bit. You're not sort of in this stuffy suit or, like if you said, the white lab coat all of the time. So I think that does add a little bit of personality.
So yeah, I guess my other favorite traditions was my graduate student mentor. Anytime there was any sort of party, he always threw the same party. And it was always Indian food and banana splits. So like the welcoming the incoming graduate class, Indian food and banana splits. Your dissertation defense, Indian food and banana splits. And my husband and I actually met in grad school. And we both just kind of found this idea so delightful that actually for our first, because of COVID, we didn't have a lot of kind of lab get-togethers. And we had our first lab get-together over the summer outside. And that's what we did. We ordered a whole bunch of Indian food. And I made banana cupcakes, so not quite banana splits. But I wanted to carry on that tradition from my graduate mentor of lab parties or Indian food and banana desserts.
Oh, that's amazing. So was there any justification as to why, or was this just sort of like the food that people liked?
I don't know. I feel like it was him. It was just something that like he really liked, or he had decided this is what people want. And he wasn't wrong. I mean, it was great. You would always order a ton of food. And so all the graduate students would bring their takeout containers and fill them up. Because when you're in grad school, you always want free food.
Well, this sounds like an amazing tradition. And I love that you're keeping it going in your lab with the Indian food and banana desserts of your choosing. And we've touched on some of the wonderful experiences that you've had over the course of your career. One of the things that we've touched on are just some of the amazing research questions that you're asking. And I think often things like funding, staff, technology, feasibility, just time, in many cases, struggling through experiments can limit the things that you can answer, the questions that you can address. So if we took away all of the barriers, Alex, that you typically face, what is the one question that you would want to answer most?
You're so used to thinking within the confines of what you can do. And I mean, that's honestly a lot of what I had to learn moving from working with animals to working with people is like, okay, how can we ask these questions without being able to do really invasive things? And I guess for me, I want to measure the brain, and I want to measure the brains of people kind of in a naturalistic eating environment. So if I had kind of any technology, it would be some sort of awesome wearable head cap that would tell me about different neurotransmitter levels in different parts of the brain, tell me about changes in all the things that we do to measure neural activity, changes in blood flow, things like that, while people were eating and kind of learning about new food experiences. That's really what I would want to know, and really just want to see those data and kind of understand a bit more about what is, because eating is such a really kind of hugely complex process. I mean, even just like coordinating a swallow is really a feat from a motor standpoint. So being able to capture the full experience of deciding to eat something, eating it, and then all of the kind of post-ingestive effects and being able to measure the brain during all of that would be amazing, because we can't really do that with our current technology. We have functional magnetic resonance imaging, which basically is people laying down in a scanner. We show people pictures of foods, or we're able to give people liquids, but we're really limited. So yeah, my kind of pie in the sky would be being able to capture a lot of neural data while people are making really natural decisions about eating, and then also what's going on in their brains when all this stuff is happening in their body, when that food's being digested, when all those nutrients are hitting the gut, when all that signaling is happening. Because we don't have a clear, complete picture. We have pieces, but we definitely don't have the whole thing.
Absolutely. I love this project that you proposed. And I think you brought up some really good points of just the limitations you have to accept to bring these questions to a point where you can study them in the laboratory. Because as you alluded to, there is all these sort of real world context surrounding food choices and eating specifically. And then also just all of the different aspects of life outside of eating that affect your eating, whether that's stress, lack of sleep, like all of these things that are sort of contributing to maybe the poor decisions you're making about food.
Yeah, and a lot of what we do in the lab is to try and strip all of that away, because as scientists, we want to say, okay, this is the particular thing that's causing this. And of course, that's useful, and that's how we know the majority of the things that we know. But because of that, we don't understand a lot about interactions. We understand a lot of phenomena in isolation and not really how they interplay with each other. For me, eating is obviously a multisensory experience. It's so wrapped up in our circumstances and, like you're saying, with stress and sleep and culture. And so I always try and be really careful to design the scientist's experiment, like the perfect experiment that is going to give us the exact explainable outcome. And then also think about, what's the fuzzier experiment? What's the experiment that has more kind of real world validity that might not be as easily interpretable, but is going to tell us maybe a bit about how some of these things are interacting with each other.
I think that is wonderful. And I know you are doing phenomenal research in your lab today, Alex. We've had so much fun learning from you. I'd love to end our conversation today with advice if we can. So when you think back on your career and your life, is there one piece of advice that really sticks out in your mind as just the piece of advice that really helped you the most that you can share with our listeners?
I think it's something that people hear a lot, but it's kind of hard to hear, that easy things are never going to get you anywhere. And, I was kind of talking about wanting to do literature because it was something that came easily to me that I didn't have to work for. And it's always the times in my life where things have been really hard, or I've had to really stretch myself or learn a new thing, or just to do the hard thing. And those have always been the most rewarding. That's what leads to the really cool discovery or the really cool paper or the next step or meeting a new person or ending up in a situation that you never thought you would. And it's always by doing the hard thing, which is not particularly great, right? Because doing hard things is hard. Mm-hmm. But I think if I had any advice for someone, it's like, okay, you're looking at that thing, at that scary thing, just go do the scary thing.
I love that advice. I think pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, you sort of discover new things about yourself, things that you maybe didn't realize you were capable of doing. And I think that is such an important part of continuing to grow as a person.
Yes, I really agree. You've got to find any situation that you're uncomfortable in, I feel like, is a chance to grow. It's a chance to learn something new. And you never learn when you're comfortable. If you expect, we actually know this about the brain. If everything's perfectly expected, you don't learn very well. It's surprise, it's novelty. That's what teaches us.
I love this advice. Well, Alex, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. We really appreciate you sharing your insights and your experiences. If our listeners want to learn more about you and the amazing work that you're doing, what is the best way for them to do so?
Maybe the easiest way to find us is that we do have an Instagram page, and on that page is a link to the lab website where you can find everything about us. And if you look on Instagram, we are Donut Lab, 2 N's, all one word. And the link in our bio brings you to the lab website where we have information about ongoing studies. My email address is there. There's pictures of people in the lab. It would just be a good place to learn more.
That sounds amazing. Listeners, definitely get connected on Instagram. Check out some of the phenomenal work that Alex and her team are doing in the lab there. And Alex, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you. And I like this idea of just learning more about the people behind the science, because that's what really it is. We're a bunch of people trying to ask questions.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you sharing your story with me and our listeners today. And listeners, it's been great to have you here as well. And we look forward to connecting again in our next episode of People Behind the Science.